December 8, 1941. The smoke above Pearl Harbor still hangs low and greasy, drifting across the water like a bruise that refuses to fade. Battleships burn at anchor. Oil creeps across the harbor in slow black sheets. Men search the water for voices that are no longer calling back. The attack is over. The explosions have stopped. And yet, for the men now responsible for defending the United States Navy, the most frightening moment has only just begun. Because nothing happens next. No Japanese ships appear on the horizon. No second wave arrives. No invasion force follows. No radio traffic breaks the silence. Across the Pacific, American commanders wait for the continuation of the blow that doctrine insists must come. Every major naval assumption before 1941 says the same thing. A surprise attack is never the end. It is the opening move. The follow-up is where empires fall. Yet as the hours pass, the ocean beyond Hawaii remains empty. Not quiet in a peaceful sense, but quiet in a way that feels deliberate, intentional, as if something vast has slipped just beyond sight. In underground command rooms and improvised offices, charts are spread and redrawn. Carrier positions are guessed, erased, guessed again. Submarine patrols report nothing. Long-range patrol aircraft see only water and sky. Radar shows no approaching formations. The absence becomes its own form of intelligence, and it terrifies the men trying to interpret it. Was this restraint? Was this preparation? Or was this the calm before something far worse? For the first time in American naval history, command authority is forced to operate without confirmation, without visibility, without reassurance. The enemy has struck once and then vanished, and in that vanishing, a new fear takes shape. Not of what Japan has done, but of what it might still be about to do. The silence after Pearl Harbor does not feel like mercy. It feels like a held breath, and held breaths, in war, usually end in violence. Before Pearl Harbor, American naval planning rests on a foundation built over decades of study, wargaming, and inherited European theory. Surprise attacks are not viewed as standalone acts. They are understood as accelerants, a blow meant to unbalance the enemy so that decisive force can follow immediately. In every staff college model, the logic is consistent. Strike first, then exploit confusion, then destroy what remains before it can recover. This belief shapes how the United States Navy interprets the devastation of December 7, 1941. Battleships lie, crippled or sunk. Airfields are wrecked. Hundreds are dead. Yet to the men now holding responsibility, this is not yet catastrophe. It is vulnerability. And vulnerability, in naval thinking, is an invitation. Admiral Husband E. Kimmel's pre-war plans assumed that any Japanese assault on Hawaii would be paired with follow-on operations, carrier raids against the West Coast, amphibious landings in the outer islands, a move against Midway or Johnston Atoll, possibly even an attempt to isolate Hawaii entirely by severing sea lanes. These are not imagined fantasies. They appear repeatedly in interwar exercises and intelligence estimates. The Japanese Navy is known to favor bold, cascading operations. Its doctrine emphasizes momentum and psychological shock. American commanders, therefore, expect the Pacific to erupt outward from Pearl Harbor within hours or days. Submarine ambushes against relief convoys, surface raiders targeting merchant shipping. A second carrier strike aimed at finishing damaged ships and fuel facilities. The absence of these actions does not bring relief. It creates analytical paralysis, because restraint does not fit the model. Radio intelligence deepens the uncertainty. Japanese naval traffic does not increase. It does not spike with coordination signals. It does not collapse into chaos either. It simply shifts. Movements are detected westward, not eastward. The carriers that delivered the attack do not reappear. They withdraw beyond search range, vanishing into the Pacific's vastness. This contradicts everything American planners believe about decisive naval warfare. The expectation had been annihilation or escalation. Instead, there is disengagement. Within Navy headquarters, a disturbing question begins to circulate quietly. If the Japanese did not intend to follow up immediately, then Pearl Harbor may not have been the beginning of a campaign against Hawaii at all. It may have been something else entirely. A single calculated strike designed to buy time, to remove a threat rather than occupy territory. That realization unsettles long-held assumptions, because it suggests that the enemy's objective is not conquest in the Central Pacific, but freedom of action elsewhere. And while American eyes remain fixed on the empty horizon beyond Oahu, Japanese forces are already moving in places. The silence has allowed commanders to temporarily forget. The danger is not that nothing is happening. The danger is that everything is happening somewhere else. As December turns into mid-December 1941, the silence after Pearl Harbor hardens into something more dangerous than confusion. It becomes structure. Absence begins to define the battle space. With no Japanese fleets detected east of Hawaii, American Naval Command is forced to make decisions based not on enemy movement, but on enemy restraint. Every hour without contact narrows options. The United States Pacific Fleet is crippled. Battleships are sunk or damaged. Repair facilities are stretched to their limits. Fuel storage, narrowly spared, is guarded obsessively. Yet the fleet's most valuable assets remain missing. The aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, are alive, mobile, and unlocated by the enemy. That fact alone convinces many officers that Japan must intend to hunt them. The logic seems unavoidable. Carriers destroyed battleships. Carriers must now destroy carriers. Search operations expand across thousands of square miles. Long-range patrol aircraft fly exhausting sorties over empty water. Submarines are pushed outward into widening arcs, reporting nothing but swells and weather fronts. Each negative report deepens the tension. The ocean feels too open, too quiet, as if the enemy has deliberately erased himself. Behind the scenes, intelligence officers struggle to reconcile signals intercepts with expectations. Japanese radio traffic suggests coordination, but not toward Hawaii. Fleet movements appear fragmented, dispersed, and methodical. There is no sign of invasion logistics aimed at the Central Pacific. No massing of troop transports, no supply buildup for prolonged operations near Oahu. This creates a strategic dilemma with no clean answer. If Japan intended to seize Hawaii, the moment has already passed. If Japan intended to destroy American naval power entirely, it has left unfinished work. And if Japan intended neither, then Pearl Harbor may have served a narrower, more chilling purpose: to neutralize, not occupy. In Washington, senior planners begin to consider an alternative interpretation. The attack may have been designed not to open a decisive battle, but to close one, to temporarily remove the American fleet as an obstacle while Japan executes rapid operations across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. Oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, airfields in the Philippines, sea lanes stretching toward Malaya and Singapore. If that is the case, then the silence is not hesitation. It is prioritization. For commanders in Hawaii, this realization is deeply unsettling. It means that the absence of Japanese forces nearby does not signal safety. It signals irrelevance. The war's center of gravity may already be shifting beyond their immediate reach, while they remain anchored to the wreckage of December 7th. Pearl Harbor has not frozen the Pacific. It has been bypassed. And the longer the silence continues, the clearer it becomes that the most dangerous decisions are being made far from the smoke still rising over Oahu. By the third week of December 1941, American Naval Command operates inside a fog created not by weather or battle damage, but by uncertainty. The silence after Pearl Harbor has forced decision-making without confirmation, and every choice now carries the risk of being catastrophically wrong. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz arrives in Hawaii on December 19th to assume command of the Pacific Fleet. He steps into a theater defined less by enemy pressure than by absence. The harbor still smells of oil and burned metal. Salvage crews work day and night. Yet Nimitz's immediate problem is not what lies beneath the water, but what lies beyond it. Somewhere across the Pacific, the Japanese fleet still exists. Its carriers are intact. Its intentions remain concealed. Doctrine offers little guidance. If the enemy is preparing a second strike against Hawaii, then dispersing the remaining carriers could invite destruction. If the enemy has shifted focus westward, then holding those carriers back risks forfeiting initiative entirely. Nimitz must choose between guarding a wound and striking outward with limited strength. False assumptions press in from all sides. Some officers believe Japan is regrouping for a decisive return, waiting for American repairs to finish so that a single blow can finish the fleet. Others argue that the absence of follow-up proves caution, even weakness. Neither position is supported by evidence. Both are built on extrapolation. Nimitz chooses restraint paired with mobility. Carriers are preserved, not risked. Patrol lines are extended cautiously. Midway and other outlying positions are reinforced, but without provoking exposure. It is a posture shaped by humility, an acknowledgement that the enemy has demonstrated a capacity for surprise that American command cannot yet counter. Meanwhile, reports from the Western Pacific grow darker by the day. Guam falls. Wake Island collapses after a brief, brutal resistance. In the Philippines, Japanese forces advance with alarming speed. Singapore comes under threat. Each new loss sharpens the meaning of the silence near Hawaii. It confirms that Japanese power has not paused. It has simply moved beyond immediate American reach. The realization spreads quietly through command circles. Pearl Harbor was not followed by chaos because chaos was unnecessary. The strike achieved its purpose. It removed interference. It cleared space. It bought time. Nimitz later reflects that these weeks were among the most dangerous of the war, not because of enemy proximity, but because of informational blindness. Decisions are made with incomplete maps and incomplete truths. Every move risks walking into an unseen trap. The silence does not break. It educates. And in doing so, it forces American command to accept a new reality. The war will not unfold according to expectation or precedent. It will be shaped by what cannot be seen and by decisions made without certainty under the weight of consequences that cannot yet be measured. By early January 1942, the illusion that Pearl Harbor would be followed by a single decisive Japanese thrust collapses completely. What replaces it is something far more unsettling. The silence has not concealed hesitation. It has concealed coordination. Reports arriving in Hawaii and Washington now form a coherent pattern. Japanese forces have not paused to regroup. They have surged outward in multiple directions simultaneously. Hong Kong falls. Manila is encircled. British capital ships are sunk off Malaya. Japanese landings appear across the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and New Guinea. The operational tempo is relentless, precise, and unforgiving. Only then does the meaning of the silence become unmistakable. Pearl Harbor was never meant to be exploited locally. It was meant to be ignored. American naval planners finally accept that the attack achieved its strategic aim the moment the battleships settled into the mud. The Japanese combined fleet did not need to finish the Pacific Fleet. It only needed to paralyze it long enough to secure the resources that would sustain a long war. Oil from Borneo, rubber from Malaya, strategic depth across an expanded defensive perimeter. Reality replaces expectation with brutal clarity. The absence of Japanese carriers near Hawaii is not restraint. It is efficiency. They are needed elsewhere. Every mile steamed back toward Pearl Harbor would have been wasted motion, every hour spent loitering a gift to American recovery. For Nimitz and his staff, this realization reframes every decision made since December 8th. The Pacific is no longer a single battlefield anchored on Hawaii. It is a constellation of collapsing fronts, each demanding attention, each impossible to save with existing forces. The war has already outgrown American capacity. The emotional weight of this moment is profound. Officers trained to think in terms of fleet engagements now confront a conflict defined by geography and logistics rather than decisive clashes. The enemy has chosen expansion over annihilation, and in doing so, it has forced the United States into a war of recovery rather than response. The silence ends not with the sound of guns, but with understanding. Pearl Harbor was not followed by an invasion because invasion was unnecessary. The United States Navy had been removed from the board without being destroyed. What followed was not hesitation, but momentum moving in another direction entirely. And once that truth settles in, fear gives way to something else. Resolve. Because if the enemy has chosen time as his weapon, then time must be taken back, slowly, deliberately, at a cost no one yet fully understands. The immediate consequences of that realization bring no relief, no surge of confidence, and no sense of regained control. Instead, they impose a colder discipline. American Naval Command understands that nothing can be rushed. There will be no dramatic counterstroke to erase December 7th. There will be no quick restoration of balance. What follows the silence is endurance. In Hawaii, salvage operations continue with grim efficiency. Sunken battleships are stabilized, patched, and slowly raised where possible, not because they will soon return to battle, but because they must not be written off. Every hull recovered represents future strength, measured not in months, but in years. The harbor becomes a factory of patience rather than a symbol of revenge. Carrier forces are preserved with almost obsessive care. Enterprise and Lexington conduct limited raids, probing the edges of Japanese expansion without committing to decisive engagements. Each sortie is weighed against the possibility of loss. The carriers are no longer instruments of immediate offense. They are strategic capital, guarded as carefully as oil reserves or shipyards. The absence of triumph shapes the American response. There are no victory communiques, no dramatic announcements. The silence after Pearl Harbor has taught commanders that noise is not power. Visibility is not control. The Japanese have demonstrated that wars can be won quietly, by removing obstacles rather than smashing them publicly. This understanding transforms planning at every level. The emphasis shifts to intelligence, reconnaissance, and logistics. Radar coverage is expanded. Code-breaking resources are quietly increased. Submarine patrols are refined not to seek glory, but to extract information. The Pacific War begins to tilt toward a conflict of detection and denial rather than spectacle. For the sailors and officers who lived through those weeks, the psychological impact is lasting. Pearl Harbor is no longer remembered only as an attack. It becomes a lesson in what follows an attack when the enemy chooses not to continue visibly. The most dangerous phase of the war, many later conclude, was not the day of destruction, but the weeks of uncertainty afterward. There is no ceremony marking the end of that silence. It fades gradually, replaced by scattered engagements, distant defeats, and cautious advances. But its effect remains embedded in every subsequent decision. The United States Navy emerges from those weeks changed, less confident in doctrine, more respectful of absence, more aware that modern war can be shaped as much by what is withheld as by what is unleashed. Long after the silence around Hawaii breaks into scattered engagements, its psychological imprint remains embedded within American Naval Command. The weeks following Pearl Harbor create a permanent sensitivity to absence. From that point forward, silence itself becomes a threat condition. A lack of contact is no longer reassuring. It is interrogated, measured, feared. Commanders begin to internalize a new strategic truth. Modern naval warfare is no longer governed solely by proximity and firepower. It is governed by information gaps. The enemy who chooses when not to act can exert as much pressure as the one who strikes openly. Pearl Harbor teaches this lesson with brutal clarity. The Japanese do not need to threaten Hawaii again for the fear to persist. The possibility alone is enough. This realization reshapes American naval psychology throughout the war. At Midway, absence becomes actionable intelligence. At Coral Sea, uncertainty is treated as danger rather than ambiguity. Submarine sightings that do not materialize into attacks still trigger repositioning. Radar contacts that fade provoke full alert responses. Silence is no longer neutral. It is adversarial. Strategically, the United States Navy learns that deterrence does not require constant presence. The Japanese example demonstrates that removal of capability, even temporarily, can achieve decisive freedom of maneuver elsewhere. This lesson is absorbed, adapted, and eventually reversed. As American industrial power accelerates, silence becomes a weapon in American hands as well. Carrier task forces learn to vanish deliberately. Radio discipline tightens. Surprise becomes a cultivated habit rather than an occasional advantage. Yet the fear born in December 1941 never fully disappears. It lingers beneath confidence. Every unexplained gap in intelligence carries echoes of the empty horizon beyond Oahu. Officers who lived through that period later describe it as a form of strategic trauma, a moment when certainty dissolved and had to be rebuilt without reassurance. The silence after Pearl Harbor does not end the war. It defines how the war will be fought, with caution layered over aggression, with patience embedded into doctrine, with an understanding that the most dangerous enemy is not always the one you see approaching. Sometimes, it is the one who has already moved on. In later years, historians often focus on the explosions at Pearl Harbor as the moment everything changed. The burning ships, the twisted steel, the shock that awakened a nation. But for those who commanded the Pacific War, the deeper transformation occurred afterward, in the quiet that followed. In the hours and days when nothing happened, when the enemy did not return, and when the ocean refused to explain itself. That silence taught the United States Navy how modern war truly begins. Not with declaration, not with occupation, but with uncertainty deliberately imposed. Pearl Harbor revealed that destruction did not need to be complete to be decisive. The Japanese attack succeeded not because it annihilated American naval power, but because it disrupted perception. It forced American command to think defensively while Japanese forces acted offensively elsewhere. The silence that followed was not a pause. It was a signal that the war would not obey familiar patterns. As the conflict unfolded, the lesson endured. At Midway, American commanders would act precisely because of what they could not see. At Guadalcanal, supply runs and carrier movements would be planned around absence and deception. By 1943 and 1944, the United States would wield silence as intentionally as Japan once had, disappearing task forces into vast oceans and reappearing where they were least expected. The fear born after Pearl Harbor matured into discipline. The empty horizon beyond Hawaii became a warning written into doctrine. Never assume restraint, never trust quiet, never mistake absence for weakness. These were lessons learned without manuals, paid for in anxiety rather than casualties, but no less real for that. When the war finally ended, many of the men who had stood watch in December 1941 struggled to explain why those weeks haunted them more than later battles. There had been no firefights, no visible enemy, only responsibility pressing against uncertainty. They had learned that the most dangerous sound in war is sometimes the one you do not hear. And from that silence, the United States Navy emerged altered forever.